Language. Language is the main device we use as humans to communicate through symbols what we think, experience, or feel. Definitions. Definitions are very useful in explaining and clarifying meaning. A typical definition has two parts. Definitum, which is the term being defined, and definium, it is the words that define the definitum. Example, a boy is defined as a male child. The boy is the definitum, and the words is the definium. We have types of definitions. 1. We have the reportive definition, which is the lexical definition or the existing meaning of the term. A correct reportive definition should not be too wide or too narrow. We have the stipulative definition. It's used to assign a new meaning to a term, whether or not the term has an existing meaning. Precising definitions. It extends the lexical definition of term for specific purpose by including additional criteria. The function of a precise definition is to make the meaning of the term more precise. Criteria for good definition. A good definition should avoid obscurity, avoid circularity, and avoid inappropriate emotional connotation. We have the definition techniques. This definition is used by synonyms, which is giving another thing that has the same meaning. Definition by ostension, which is explaining the term by giving examples. Ambiguity. An ambiguous expression is an expression with more than one meaning or reference. There are different kinds of ambiguity. We have the lexical ambiguities. These are cases where a single word or name has more than one meaning in a language. Example, Japanese teacher might mean a teacher from Japan or anyone who teaches Japanese. Referential. It arises when the context does not make it clear what a pronoun is referring to. Example, John hit Peter with his iPhone and he died. We have the syntactic ambiguity. It's the presence of two or more possible meanings within a single sentence. Example, Isaac saw John on the rooftop with a telephone. So the question is, did Isaac use a telephone or did he see John carrying one on the rooftop? Vagueness. A term is vague if it has an imprecise boundary. It lacks correct, clear, and specific meaning. Vagueness in a statement decreases the amount of information that is being conveyed.
Vagueness involves in a term that lacks precision. It's a language that is not clear and mostly common in speaking. We often add words and phrases like example, kind of, sort of, about, and etc. Vagueness is similar to ambiguity, but the difference between them is vagueness is imprecise, vagueness is not clear, but ambiguity are words that has two or more meanings.
Use and mention. It is important to distinguish the use of a word from the mention of a word. There's a difference between using a word and mentioning a word. Without this distinction, any word can be imagined to serve as the subject of a statement and therefore to count as a term. The word, for instance, if you take the word wherever is not a term, but wherever in quotes can serve as a subject of a statement. For example, take a statement like, wherever is an 8-letter word. In this statement, it is not the word itself that is the subject, but rather the quoted word. The word is said to be mentioned, not used. On the other hand, wherever is used in this statement. I will follow you wherever you go. In distinguishing terms from non-terms, you must always be sure that the word or the group of words can be used as the subject of a statement. Consistency. A set of statements is consistent when and only when it is logically possible for all of them to be true in the same situation. Otherwise, they are inconsistent. So, for example, Adrian is happy and Adrian is married are consistent with each other, since there is no reason why a married person cannot be happy. On the other hand, Visana is 30 years old and Visana is 20 years old are obviously inconsistent. Here are a few more points to remember about consistency. 1. Inconsistent statements are also known as contraries. 2. We can also speak of a single statement as consistent or inconsistent, depending on whether it is logically possible for it to be true. There are round squares is inconsistent and false. Paris is in France is consistent and true. Nobody lives in Paris is consistent but false. Whether a set of statements is consistent depends on whether it is logically possible for all of them to be true in the same situation. It is not necessary that they are actually true. Paris is in Italy and nobody lives in Paris are consistent with each other, even though both are actually false. To show that a set of statements is consistent, we can either show that they are actually true or describe a logically possible situation in which they are all true. 3. Consider the two previous statements about Paris. Imagine that Italy conquers France with chemical weapons and takes over Paris, but Paris became contaminated and everyone leaves. This imaginary situation is far-fetched but coherent and shows that the statements are consistent. Statements that are actually true are consistent with each other, but false statements might or might not be consistent with each other. 4. The two previous statements about Paris are false but consistent. Nobody lives in Paris and only 10 people live in Paris are false and inconsistent with each other. 5. If a set of statements is inconsistent, the statements will entail a contradiction of the form below. P, and it is not the case that P. Take the sentence, nobody lives in Paris, and the statement, only 10 people live in Paris. The second statement entails, it is not the case that nobody lives in Paris. And together with the first statement, they entail the blatant contradiction. Nobody lives in Paris, and it is not the case that nobody lives in Paris. Many inconsistencies are easy to detect, but not always easy. Suppose that someone says we should be cautious in making general claims. This seems like good advice because sweeping generalizations like every Italian loves pizza and all Belgian chocolates are good are bound to have exceptions. So we might be tempted to conclude that all general claims have exceptions. But the claim below, all general claims have exceptions, is actually inconsistent. It is itself a general claim, and if it were true, it should also have an exception. But this implies that not all general claims have exceptions. In other words, the claim cannot possibly be true and is therefore inconsistent. If we want to speak truly, We should avoid inconsistent statements. But sometimes, ordinary speakers use sentences that seem to be inconsistent, such as, I am happy and I am not happy. Why do people say things that cannot be true? One answer is that these sentences have incomplete meaning. When we fully specify their meaning, they are no longer inconsistent. For example, perhaps the speaker is happy that she is getting married, but she is also not happy that her ex-boyfriend showed up at the wedding. She is happy about one thing and not happy about a different thing, so there is no real inconsistency.
Implications. According to Linda Elder and Richard Paul, implication is that to which our thinking is leading us. When you say things, you imply certain other things. Example is, if you make a promise, you imply that you will keep it. In critical thinking, you don't just accept an argument because it seems correct on the surface.
Logical equivalence. If P entails Q and Q entails P, then P and Q are logically equivalent. For example, Superman is more powerful than Batman is logically equivalent to Batman is less powerful than Superman. When two statements are logically equivalent, they necessarily have the same truth value. It is not possible for one of them to be true and the other one to be false. In formal logic, P equivalent Q means that P and Q are logically equivalent. If P is equivalent to Q, then Q is equivalent to P. Every statement is logically equivalent to itself.
Necessary truth is one that could not have been false, one that could have been true no matter how things turned out. For example, Kwame is a bachelor. That means Kwame is not married, and that it is a true statement. Necessary falsehood is a statement that is false, and no matter how you present it, it is false. 17 is not a prime number, and yes, 17 is not a prime number. Contingent truth and contingent falsehood. In philosophy, contingency is regarded as a status of proposition that are neither true under every possible valuation nor false. Contingent truth is considered as a true statement that could have been otherwise. Example is to say that it's contingent that heavy objects fall towards the earth. Because we can easily imagine what it is, it could be like they did not. This is so even though it is physically necessary that heavy objects fall. Meanwhile, contingency falsehood is a statement that is false but might not have been so. The earth has two moons is a contingent falsehood statement, for we can imagine what it could be like to have two moons.